I would like to start off with something a little bit, I don't know, confrontational. No, not confrontational. That's not the right word. Observational. So one of the things that I find really interesting about the past 2 days is I don't think the names Instagram, Twitter, Airbnb, TikTok have come up at all in the discussion on distribution. And the reason I bring that up is I think a lot of what we talk about is focused on a long-standing way of things that we've done a certain way. And so Jeff and I are here to talk about payments. We think that payments for a long time at HEDNA involved CVV codes and processing no-shows. One of the things that we're seeing increasingly is that payments really is becoming a focus for hoteliers. I mean, if you look at some of the news over the past 6 months or so, Booking.com announced plans to be a fintech. If you think about really the realm of fintech, Expedia is probably the largest and most successful fintech company in the world, given all of the payments that they collect inbound and all the payments that they send outbound. So within the HEDNA community, we started talking about payments a decade ago, and we spent a fair amount of time over the past decade talking about what the experience should be like from the guest perspective, what the experience should be like for B2B transactions. So we've had working groups for years. We actually had an amazing working group session yesterday where all the work that we've had in different working groups the past 3 years has sort of gotten us to this point of post-COVID where suddenly hoteliers like IHG are understanding the strategic imperative to allow a guest to pay the way they want to pay. And it's sort of going back to TikTok and Instagram, whereas they're very important to future ways of distribution. If you look at the way money transfers among that generation, it's very different than paying the way we're accustomed to, or those in this room are. I mean, we will get to a point someday soon where you'll pay for a hotel room with Venmo.
Very soon, I mean, imagine.
It'll be within, I'm guessing it'll be within this year, the next year. So our conversation is going to be hopefully free-flowing, really taken from IHG's perspective. We would encourage questions, because I have some questions, but I think the goal here is to address the topics that you want us to address. I'll start off with a basic question for you. What's the most surprising thing you've learned about payments while you've been at IHG? Actually, why don't you explain what you do at IHG, and then we can ask that question.
Well, at IHG, I help the hotels set up their merchant accounts, look for ways to process payments correctly, save money, fight chargebacks, disputes, whatever you want to call it. But when I first got to IHG, I've been in payments for 13 years prior to joining IHG. When I got to IHG, I never would have imagined the complexity of the systems involved. All the integrations, all the touch points that need to connect. And it's amazing to me that it's not just an IHG thing, it is a hospitality aspect. So I think that's one of the major complexities that a lot of vendors that I speak with make it sound so easy, but in reality, it's probably one of the most complex payment challenges that we face.
Well, it's interesting when you speak to, with all respect to the payment companies in the room, when you speak to payment companies that haven't worked with hotels, nothing that we do payment-wise is logical or makes sense. And then if you ask them something like, well, how do you process a no-show? There's a glazing over, I don't know what that is. The title of this session, I just want to make sure I get it correctly, is Why Do Hotels Continue to Pay Way More Than They Should? You feel like this title is a little melodramatic?
Yes and no. I mean, there's the obvious reasons that everyone knows about: the high ticket size. Thank you, American Express, for your wonderful rates. The international travelers. It's all of those that are obvious, but there's also some that we need to really look at. Once again, we go back to the technology, the connectivity between the brand.com and the hotels themselves. How do we get the payment down there? How do we do it securely? How do we accept alternative payments? The biggest challenge right now is merchant of record. How do we get that from a hotel aspect down to, or a brand down to the hotel? So, I mean, you can list off a number of things, like I said before, but it's my thing is it has to be education and training. Okay, everyone needs to understand what the flow is from start to finish, and how do we accept it correctly, how do we process it correctly and securely, and how do we find those challenges, those gaps. That's why I had that conversation we had yesterday in that payment meeting was wonderful, and I hope more people join these working groups, because all that collaboration really opens up ideas on how to solve this.
Well, for those of you who aren't familiar with how payments work at hotels and your focus on distribution, one of the things that I think is shocking to me is if you look at a cross-border guest, as an industry, we're probably paying 2, 3, maybe as much as 4% more of the overall booking value than we should be to process that transaction, given what's available in the market. What I'd actually love to see is at some point in the future, hopefully the very near future, where the costs of distribution and the costs of payment are coupled with the whole revenue management function, because you can have a commission rate of X, and then on top of that, you're paying 3 to 5% to process the hotel booking. And I'm sure that's something you've worked on.
Well, I mean, all hotels have to be looking at that in order to lower the costs.
Are they though?
I hope so. I know we are. Okay. I don't know about the other brands, but that is something that has to be on everyone's radar. Once again, all of those aspects need to connect in order for us to get to where we need to be. If you look at today's world, or 10 years ago, as a matter of fact, there weren't talks of alternative payments that much like there is today. So you didn't have to worry. Payments wasn't a big thing. Accept the major card brands and you're fine. But the pandemic has really opened up everyone's eyes to the fact that we need to start looking out for how do we accept more, how do we get the guests to come back in and accept the form of payment that they want in order for us to get that revenue back up.
Well, especially with the contactless journey, if somebody is checking into your hotel with a phone and you don't have staff at the front desk because of the Great Resignation and all those other complications, I mean, it would seem a tremendous opportunity for change in the industry that would allow us to provide guest benefits. I think on one of the webinars early in the pandemic, you actually said something that has stuck with me, and I think somebody, it may have been me, I don't think it was, but somebody asked you whether, what was the primary reason that hoteliers weren't making these sort of changes before the pandemic, and you responded, well, before the pandemic, it was inertia, and now we don't have inertia. So in an environment where we don't have inertia, how are you seeing more openness to change?
Oh, absolutely, because once again, it's the fact that how do we get that revenue back up for the hotels? In order to do that, you have to accept more payments, you have to make it easier, you have to make it flow better, you have to have that connectivity, and you have to do it on a global scale. You can't do it hotel by hotel. That's impossible. So how do we do that? That's the biggest question.
So I think you said earlier, for you, this is all about education, and
yes.
With the role that IHG has in its management of the brand and the properties, I mean, it seems like getting your owners on board is really one of the more critical components.
With anything, absolutely. But it starts at the top. How do we get our executives to understand the importance of it and the complexity of it. And then how do we communicate that to the hotel owners? How do we get them on board? It's not like we can force any of this onto them. We don't want to. So how do we get them to want to take on this new technology, to spend the money to be able to do this kind of stuff in a world where money is tight? And that's the biggest challenge, honestly.
It's especially in the hotel industry where historically payments have been done at the property level, even at a brand level, you may not know what the overall cost of payment is. So it makes doing an assessment or a cost saving benefit really challenging.
That is a task that is very difficult to accomplish. Every region has their own, regulations involved. Privacy is a huge thing. So it's not like we can go to the card brands and say, hey, give me the cost that our hotels are paying. Right. Well, we're not the owners of the account, so we can't really do that. So it's making sure that we have that partnership with the hotel owners, educating them once again on why we're doing what we need to do and what the benefits would be to them, and make sure they're on board during the whole process.
So absolutely. You also need to go through the senior management discussions. And I know we've discussed how pretty open to everything your senior leadership. How does that conversation go?
Well, the pandemic's really helped. Before that, it was kind of hard because there's a lot of projects, a lot of initiatives that everyone's trying to accomplish. Not just my department, or there's the technology, distribution, there's marketing. Everyone has their own little projects, but trying to prioritize it is luckily that's above my pay grade. But now that the pandemic has really forced people to look at how can we increase money into the hotels, that has taken the lead. So it's not that difficult anymore. It's just now how do we get the other departments, everyone else, to work together to get those connectivities to work to where we need it to be.
Do you have a lot of other projects that would contribute 2% to the bottom line?
Yes.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Good to know. So we do have a question. OTAs have solved and by the way, I'm sorry for turning my back to this side of the room, but if you're under 5'6" and sitting in these chairs, and if I sat all the way back, I'd look like a ventriloquist dummy, so I'm just sort of leaning forward. OTAs have solved a lot of cross-border payment cost issues and alternative payments. What are the biggest challenges for a brand like IHG to do the same?
It's adoption by the hotels, because once again, IHG or any other brand can easily get there and become a PayFac or work with a company that can connect all of our hotels on a global scale, but getting the hotels to buy the equipment, getting the hotels to adopt that, getting the hotels to train their front staff on the proper way to do this that's more of a challenge than the OTAs have to deal with.
Well, I guess why hasn't a brand like IHG just started to view itself to be an OTA for internal bookings? And that's always been a shock to me.
There's a lot of reasons. It could be tax reasons, it could be liability reasons, regulatory reasons, staffing reasons is a big one. There's not one major reason why that's not the case, or why IHG specifically hasn't done that. In the perfect world, IHG would be the merchant of record for all the hotels. Hotels would be happy to take on any equipment that we seem necessary, and it would be a great world, but that's not the case. So when OTAs have solved that problem, yes, that's great for them, but when they pay the hotels, it's in a virtual card. It's not ACH, it's not any other form of payment that the guests or that the hotels prefer to pay. It's one form of payment.
Well, we should talk a little bit later. I have a company that I know. So the notion of payment strategy, it seems like there are two components to it. One is the consumer, one is B2B payments. Mm-hmm. from a brand, is it easier, brand perspective, is it easier to work with the hotels on one or the other?
B2B, honestly, because once again, when it comes to leisure travel, there's a lot more payment types that guests can pay with. If you look at Alipay, if you look at regional payments, if you look at ACH or PayPal, things of that nature. But if you look at B2B, it's card. It's if you look at companies like Confirma or things like that, where or FleetCor, they generally like to pay with their cards, and that is easier because it's more. How do we get them compliant with that rather than faxing? It's how do we get the payment securely to them, to the hotels. But leisure is the hardest one.
All right. So let's talk about. Actually, this is I guess a bit of both, but we're seeing a lot of change again with the contactless journey. We're seeing a lot of change with contactless payments, and one of the things that I like to ask people from the card schemes is, when will the last plastic card be created? And we're getting to a point where there will not be plastic credit cards in the future. So effectively, every consumer transaction will be done through a phone, so through some wallet. When we look at the infrastructure that's in place in the hotel industry, to me, it seems very built for card-present transactions.
Yeah.
What do we do in 2030 when there are no longer cards being used, or in 3 years?
It could be quicker than that, quicker than 3 years, because look at it. Digital key is going to be the next biggest thing. How do we incorporate that into the payment? And how do we incorporate that to be a card-present, not card-on-file type transaction? To where it protects the hotels from any potential disputes. That, I think, is, when they say card is going to be gone, I believe it, because once again, the pandemic has really forced people to use their phones. And people like using their phones. It's just everyone carries it around. I don't like to carry my wallet around and have to carry around a card. And it would be great if I could use my phone to get into my room and not have to worry about a key not working, have to go back downstairs, get a new key. But that's the thing. I think the next step is, how do we incorporate the payment into the digital key type product?
And that's a 3-year horizon, I would imagine, for most of the major brands. And
absolutely.
I mean, it's funny because during the pandemic, I at one point realized I had gone 13 months without touching cash, and then I started using my phone for payments, and I probably went 3 months without even touching my credit cards. And it is, and I'm an old man. It is something that, as we have younger travelers coming to hotels, the payment mix is going to change, but for those of you in the audience, I think this issue around payment, guest localization, and moving toward a fully card not present world is one that we need to prepare for, which leads us to a question, which is, do you think the check-in, swipe a card, pick up a key will cease to exist? I think we've just answered that one, so thank you for the question. Sorry we didn't read it first. When do you think it'll go away?
I hope it never does, because that's part of hospitality is that face-to-face sort of experience, and having that opportunity to greet the guest and treat them exceptionally, and to want them to come back. But in reality, that's going to go away sooner than later. There's no time frame that I can give, but kiosks might be a thing of the future, where people can just go in, check in at a kiosk, and go to the room, or not even use their phone, use their app, digitally check in, digitally check out. But once again, the technology is I don't think it's going to be sooner rather than later, because the complexity of the integrations that are involved.
That's a great point. We sort of, our legacy systems constrain us in ways that I think we all know. So
Absolutely.
So one of the topics that I find fascinating about the hotel industry, and by fascinating I mean intensely frustrating, is foreign exchange and multi-currency pricing. So
Yes.
I've worked with airlines in the past, and if you're an airline, a customer going to an airline, they read your IP address, determine what country you likely are from, and they display pricing to you in that local currency. And then they then they offer up payment methods to that country.
Yep.
And then they process the transaction at that time for that amount in that currency with that payment method based on where the guest is coming from. Now, as I understand hotels, you have to either go to an OTA or you you're served indicative pricing, and that just, you're subject to currency fluctuation.
And that's, once again, is the complexity of hotel compared to anyone else, any other industry. It's when you look at OTAs, they are the merchant of record. If you look at airlines, they're the merchant of record. Hotels don't have that capability yet. So it's not like a brand.com can take that same thing and say, okay, we're going to offer you this form of payment, because once again, we're not the merchant of record. So we don't know if that hotel can accept that type of payment, or if they even want to. And that's the challenge that we need to solve for. And I think that has been a major thing that we are looking at, is how do we solve for that now, rather than worrying about other little things and that not coming up. So the pandemic has really forced that upon us, luckily, in my opinion.
Yeah, the merchant of record discussion, I mean, it's so interesting. Everyone gets very concerned about merchant of record as a thing. Merchant of record as a concept is a creation of the card systems.
Yep.
And when you get beyond that from a legal and tax standpoint, it's not. And so I think one of the things that we as a working group and as an association need to do is really drill into what the repercussions of that, because I'm guessing there are at least 20 people in this room right now who are sitting there thinking, I need to talk to Jeff after this because I've got a solution for it.
Oh yeah, and I want to talk to them too, all of you out there.
There's a break after this. So.
No, we know there's products and services out there that'll help us with any hotel brand, not just IHG, but all of them. The problem, once again, is if that service is adopted, it's how do we get the hotels to adopt it as well? It's one thing to do it as a brand, but getting the actual properties to do it is a challenge unto itself.
It's an entire education program.
Absolutely.
So let's start with the easier part. What tools do you need to sell this concept to leadership internally? And speak not necessarily just with regard to IHG, but for the other hoteliers in the room, what's the process that we need to be going through?
Education is the first and foremost. Payments is so complex to begin with, and then if you add in the challenges of the integrations involved, it's breaking it down to where somebody can easily absorb it, understand the benefits of what you're trying to solve for, and communicate it to the hotels to get them to understand the benefits of working on a payment strategy. That has luckily not been too big of a challenge. It's now how do we implement that kind of stuff. That is going to be the biggest challenge next, in my opinion. Only, once again, there's so many things going on, so many touch points you have to worry about, so many regulations in different countries, and yes, there are companies out there that can solve for that right now, but it's still something we need to look at.
So thank you, and I think that the takeaways for me for this session are, A, this is complicated, B, this is going to save a lot of money and
yes,
and make the customer experience so much better, and it's going to be really complicated to get there, but a lot of the technology exists, and it's just going to, we have this incredible window of opportunity now as we resurface from the pandemic. So with that, I would like to thank you. It's been a pleasure chatting about payments. For those of you who are in the audience, thanks for joining us. And I believe we go to a break now. Oh wait, we have one question. I'm not going to do that. We can ask the question is simply, Why is the payment industry that behind compared to Asia or Europe? Cash and credits are readily used elsewhere. Mobile adoption is in early stages. This is a great question and one that I think would be fantastic to discuss at the break, guys. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.